What's going on, everybody? Alexa, volume 4. What's up? What's up? How's everybody doing tonight? Welcome back to the stream. We have a very exciting episode today. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, you know what to do. Go ahead and leave your location in the comment section so I can see where you are checking it from. But yesterday, I said that we were going to have Dr. Joseph on here to talk about dating with mental health conditions. Do the dance. So I'm excited to have her on here. She's waiting in the green room right now, so we're gonna have a very good and productive talk. I see people are checking in from New Brunswick, Canada, Florida. Ricky, thank you so much. We see Missouri, West Virginia, Orlando, Northern California, Cleveland, West Virginia. Is anybody from New York? New York City? No New York? Oh, Brooklyn. I guess Brooklyn counts, right? This is part of the 5 boroughs. Florida, Montana, Berkeley, California, Charlotte, Grovetown. Okay, so I used to live in Grovetown as well. Perfect. So I said that they've given up on dating and they're in Missouri. Well, I need you to stay in the stream a little bit longer because you might hear some words of encouragement from Dr. Joseph. Tampa in the house, Michigan, Columbus, Ohio, Marietta, Ohio, Sacramento, Wisconsin, Houston. Okay, so I want to thank you all for coming through. Like I said, this is going to be a great episode, and I've had a lot of people send DMs about this topic, and I can't, reply to the majority of the DMs, but we're going to get into all of the questions. I'm going to let Dr. Joseph introduce herself, and then once she does that, I'm going to allow her to talk like the same way I do it every stream, where I do my little rant and I check the comment section to get some good feedback from you also. No sex drive or desire. Angela, we got you. We got you. I think we're going to do our best to help you out. So I'm going to bring in Dr. Judith Joseph. And I've been fumbling over the word Judith. I keep wanting to say Judy. So we're going to bring in Dr. Joseph. I'll let her introduce herself. Come on in. Hey, Doc, how you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm excited to have you on. I told the community yesterday that we're going to have New York City's top psychiatrist on, and she's going to give us the inside scoop on how to navigate the dating environment. So I'm excited to have you on today.
I'm excited to be here. And I lived in some of those places that you read out, so I have some insight on that too.
Like Missouri, or which place have you been?
I lived in North Carolina. I've lived in
Okay.
Brooklyn. I lived in Trinidad. I lived in the
Okay.
Midwest for a while. So, south, north, really, really south.
Wow.
It doesn't
Okay.
matter where we live. We all want love and we all want to be with someone. So,
Right.
um, well,
And Trinidad, is that what you're from originally, or?
yeah, I'm from Trinidad.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Did not know that. So I'm learning that on the fly too. That's exciting. So, how would you describe yourself for the people who are, may not have seen you before on Instagram or on TV or anywhere? How would you describe yourself?
I mean, I'm very much like you. I'm a psychiatrist and I treat children, adults, and families. And sometimes, a lot of my patients will say that they're having a problem with their relationship. So, with their permission, I'll bring their partner in. So, I
Oh,
treat just about everyone.
that's exciting. So, when you say your patients say that they have issues in their relationships, what are some of the most, to start off, what are some of the most common, frustrations that people have in their relationships when they come to see you?
Someone brought up sex drive, and
Mhm.
I'm glad they brought that up because people do not talk about that. It's usually
Yeah.
like the last thing on the list. And so, I got to bring that up just to make sure,
Right.
because the medications cause problems in that area, right? So, that's one of the things I talk about. Also, it's like, should I tell, the person that I'm dating that I have this, or that I, struggle
Hmm.
with that? That's a really, really common one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people who are leaving, some feedback in, definitely save some of your questions because I'm going to get to some of your questions, and I want you all to get value from this stream. But when you mentioned both those things, the sex drive, like how would you, for somebody who's watching at home, how would you approach that, conversation with a doctor? Like, there's no, I can't think of like an icebreaker to get into that. Do you just come out and say it, or like how how do you, approach that?
So, like I think what it is that if someone for me like is used to dating and then all of a sudden I hear a lot about school, I hear about, their friends, I hear about work, and I'm not hearing about dating, then I'll be like, oh, that for me is like, what's going on in that area. So
Right.
I'll ask like, sometimes with the medications, you don't feel so excited and your body feels different. And, and I'll sometimes just say, and you just don't feel like having sex. And then, my patients are so relieved. They're like, I wanted to bring it up, but I didn't want to say it. It's embarrassing, So I tend to bring it up because it's like on that list of
Right.
items, especially with depression. There's a term called anhedonia. It literally means, not able to enjoy things, not able to have pleasure. And sex is one of the like kind of free pleasures in life. So you really have to ask your patients about it.
Yeah, that's good, and I'm happy that you're saying that you ask about it in a way that's not like embarrassing or shameful, because sometimes they might have a desire to want to talk about it, but if there's no safe space to really get into it, then you can't get into it. And I wanted to segue to the second thing you mentioned about telling somebody that you have a mental health condition, like when's the right time, or should you tell somebody, or should you fill them out first? Like, how would you approach that?
You know what? Like stigma is a big thing. We're always talking about like, oh, there's nothing wrong with it. Let's get rid of stigma. But it's very different when you're in this like intimate relationship and you really like the person and you're just trying to get to know each other. And, what I say is that it depends on the individual, right? Like
Hmm.
usually when we're talking about relationships, I'm getting a sense as to whether or not this is a partner that is supportive, this is a partner that is validating, right?
Hmm.
And so sometimes you hear these words and you hear these patterns and you're just like, think about how this is going to play out. If this is an invalidating partner, if this is someone who is not, very empathic, do you want to really go there just yet? So it depends on the situation. And what I will say is that if you have a supportive partner and you feel safe and your therapist kind of gets a sense that this is someone who is actually healthy for you, then you can talk about that, you know.
Okay, I like that, and I'm looking through some of the comments because people are like, as I'm looking left and right, people are leaving some really, really good questions here. A lot of people are tuning in tonight. Looks like we have see 500 people on Facebook, maybe some more people elsewhere. But somebody had a really good question. What about a huge overactive sex drive, entire life, 44-year-old woman? How would you approach that? Because like when I think of it, I think that there's some shame. I'm just guessing. I could be wrong here, so I could be wrong, y'all. But I think when it comes to like maybe hypersexuality or a higher sex drive, it's something that you kind of maybe attribute to men, or men don't get as much shame for it. So for a 44-year-old woman, how would you, like, how would you approach that when she says, "I have a sex drive that I think is too high"?
You know, for me, hypersexuality is not just something that's male or female. And I run a trauma lab, a PTSD lab. And so people don't realize that one of the symptoms of trauma is hypersexuality. And you're like, wait, why would somebody
Uh,
who's been, abused, or someone who's been, violated want to have more sex? It's actually counterintuitive. And so it's a flag and a symptom that a lot of doctors kind of don't acknowledge. They don't even know that it exists. And
mhm.
so, the opposite thing, like doing impulsive, risky behaviors, like, having a lot of sex with different people, or having unprotected or unsafe sex, or just even being hypersexual can be a symptom of trauma. Also, this, that like hypersexuality can also be related to mood disorders like mania and hypomania. So there's a lot of different reasons for, hypersexuality. So, you really have to tease out other symptoms as well.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you mentioned that, especially like link between hypersexuality and trauma. And I think every provider has their own way of going about asking these questions. Because like if I'm, now I'm doing virtual work, so like it's not face to face, but like if for me, it's a little easier like when I have a male client to approach that topic. But like if I have a lady, like you want to respect boundaries as you talk about it. How and it's like when you're screening out, take mood disorders for example, right? You're trying to screen for like hypersexuality within the context of a manic episode, maybe, right? So how do you phrase that? Because like I'll say, do you think you've been having more sex than usual, or have you been not thinking about sex before you have it? Like, are you like, is it premeditated, or do you just kind of find yourself there with no protection? Like how do you ask those difficult questions? Kind of put you on the spot there.
So in my lab, I use standardized assessments. So I actually will give, all patients, no matter how they identify, in terms of gender or sexuality or orientation, I'll give them a copy of the questionnaire that I'm going to ask. So they see that it's not like I'm not asking this to one person or other person. Everybody gets asked the same thing. And as a part of the HAM-D, which is a diagnostic assessment for depression, it actually talks very frankly about sexuality and whether or not you are as interested or you're engaging or if you have libido. And it'll use words that are very technical, that have to do with the genital organs. So my patients will be like, oh, this is like a medical assessment. We all have brains, so we all have mental health, right? And I think we don't think about it that way. We think that like, okay, some people have mental health issues and other people don't. No, we all have mental health because we all have brains, we all have emotions. So when I phrase it that way, it becomes less stigmatized. It's more of like, oh, this is a part of my body. The same for, that's why I brought up trauma. There's an assessment called the CAPS-5, which is the gold standard for PTSD. And there is a specific question there about, risky behaviors like sex. So, that way, my patients kind of feel like, oh, this is a really standardized diagnostic assessment. Right. And that way my doctor's using this measure to see if I'm getting better or worse over time.
Right. And I like you actually spelling out the assessments that we use, because on TikTok it's actually funny because I received some advice early on and I think it was actually helpful to like make it as easy as possible. But sometimes I think people do want to know about HAM-D, G87 or MDQ. Sometimes people want to know like what standardized assessment, so that way they don't think that their psychiatrist is a creep or a perv, or just asking intrusive questions. So I really like that answer. I like how you broke that down. And I have
high blood pressure. You check your numbers, right? You're going to check whether or not your blood pressure is going up or not. Everything's numerical in medicine. So when we use numbers in psychiatry, because psychiatry is medicine, it helps patients to know that this is not just like loosey-goosey. Are you feeling better? Are you feeling worse? There's actually metrics,
Right. And I don't think people really like, I mean, from what I've seen like online, I don't think people have the best rapport with their therapists and psychiatrists. But it's changing, and I think these explanations, the fact that somebody can watch this from anywhere in the world and like hear you talk, I think that's very helpful. So I really do appreciate that. And I have a question. So for those with trauma, right? How would you move forward with trauma, especially like with your sex life and also just in general, and would you tell somebody, because I think about this from time to time, would you tell somebody? If so, when would you tell them about what happened to you in the past, and that's why you are the way you are?
Yeah, trauma is something that, like I said, it can go either way. You can either become hypersexual or you can become like avoidant, right? Because that one of the symptoms of PTSD is avoidance. And so again, some people have partners who are invalidating, and it's not just when it comes to sex, right? It's like, oh, I ordered this when we went out to dinner and they were like, oh, that's disgusting, like little things. So when you're working with your therapist will not tell you what to do, right? A good therapist allows you to talk and just kind of like allows you to figure things out, but guides you in this really protective frame. And there's something called the transference, right? So like a lot of times what's happening in real world is being played out in the therapy
Right.
So your therapist would be like, you know, kind of nudging you to like, this person is invalidating. So why would you expose yourself to someone who is invalidating and sometimes like straight up toxic, right? So I think
Right.
it really depends on the relationship dynamic. In other, scenarios, someone is compassionate and they're validating and they're empathic, and then in those situations a therapist may guide you to feel more comfortable with sharing and being less avoidant, and working through these relationships issues can actually help you to heal your trauma in a healthy relationship.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you for sharing it. As I looked through the comments, somebody said that they waited a year to open up to their husband. Like that's their husband. So I mean, I wouldn't blame anybody for how they go about doing things. But I like, like you breaking it down because so you have to work some of these things out, and by trying to like avoid what happened to you or not, like act as if it never happened. Sometimes that brings you more pain. Trying to avoid that the trauma, because trauma is, it's kind of like a shadow sometimes. Like you never really get to shake it sometimes, or it feels that way sometimes. So I like that explanation. And I saw a question here. Somebody was saying, how do you deal with like one partner having a high sex drive and the other partner having a low sex drive?
Yeah, it depends, because if the definition of high is like, like a couple of times a week or a month, and then low as in like completely off proportion, I want to understand that dynamic. And there are very well-renowned sex therapists who will say there's no such thing as a magic number. It's the quality of the intimacy, right? So if, let's say you have, especially I treat, women who are postpartum, and they're just like, man, like, my partner's been waiting for so long and I'm tired and I'm breastfeeding and all that. It's like, okay, so you physically, you just feel like not capable of, meeting your partner's needs. But what about that 1 second where you grab that person and there's something called simmering, where you're not actually having an intimate relationship, you're just like holding each other, it's like the pre kind of warming up to it, but then you walk away. So what are the qualities of the other parts of sex, right, that you're engaging in, or are you just not engaging at all? So it's not as cut and dry as one person has more, one person has less. You want to know about the dynamics. Is there intimacy? Is there simmering, cuddling? Is there, that flirtation, or is it just like, I am irritable, get out of my face, right?
Right.
So, that's why I say sometimes I will bring the partner in just to learn a bit more, because then I find out that I'm dealing with a full-on postpartum depression, and it's not just about the sex,
Right.
like issues related to the attachment of the mother and child. So um
I
wanted
like that. And but for me personally, I would like, if I was married and somebody, if I was in that same situation, I think it'd be helpful to, be able to like point to this as the cause, right? Because it helps like absolve you of that guilt and feeling like, oh, it's you, but it's like you uncovered it in this postpartum depression, and then it's you and the other person, working uh, against the depression versus you versus this person, and then everything is left up to interpretation, and you're like, oh, why are they thinking this way, or like what's going on? So I like the fact that you bring like the other person in and you can get to the bottom of the issue. I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with postpartum, there's a baby involved. So you really want to
Right.
involve the family. And that could be very powerful. And then you sometimes can save a family dynamic, rather than a partner saying, why are you not doing this? Why aren't you happy for having a baby? It's like, oh, this is a medical condition.
Right.
Hormones dropped in the brain after you gave birth. And like, that's why, okay, let's fix this. Let's work on this together.
Right. And speaking from a male's perspective, obviously like I know about postpartum depression, but it's still helpful to know or just to have somebody explain it. I think you as a doctor, you telling them or telling the partner, I think that's a little bit different from the lady speaking for herself. Like it's coming from a third party source. Not that it's not legitimate coming from her, but like a professional is telling you, like spelling out what's happening. It helps you feel like, okay, there's a real problem here. It's not just her or me. So I like that. And somebody had a question about long distance relationships. And they said it was hard. I know it's hard, but what's your take on long distance relationships in general? But before you talk about that. We had Dr. Hamdani on uh, last week, and she talked about how when she was in residency and then she was in a long distance relationship with her now husband, it was actually helpful for her, so she couldn't make any impulsive decisions on I'm leaving or I'm going. So that was a situation where it actually worked out, and I liked that story from her. But what are your thoughts on long distance relationships in general?
I'm glad you brought that scenario up because somebody can be in the same city, in the same town, in the same bed with someone and feel distant, right? So, it depends on this on the dynamic. Or like you brought up, one person can be very, very busy and the other person has a lot of free time on their hand, right? And so that dynamic may not work out for a long distance relationship because the
Mhm.
the scale's off, right? But if you're both super busy, in this kind of like this place in your life where you're prioritizing other things and there's this common goal where you're going to be together, then that can actually be very healthy because you're at a place eventually where you're on the same page, right?
Mhm.
And like I said, being in the same bed with someone in the same house with the same family can feel like a long distance relationship. And just,
Wow.
like hundreds of years ago, that's what people did. They would write to each other. It was actually kind of romantic. There was that anticipation. So it can be either it can make or break you, right? It depends on the person and the balance.
Right. And my next question, somebody brought it up here about borderline personality disorder, saying that the girlfriend has BPD. I do my best to study positive interaction methods with her, as well as reinforcing techniques from her therapist. So when it comes to borderline and relationships, what's your take on that? And do you? I know you do, but I guess it's helpful to hear it. But do you believe that people with borderline personality disorder can have healthy and productive relationships?
I treat a lot of patients with borderline personality disorder, and it's really difficult because there's this stigma in movies like
Yeah.
what are these movies like Hand That Rocks the Cradle and like Fatal Attraction and all these movies that make people single white female that make people seem like they're like crazy, literally.
Mhm.
And it's such a painful diagnosis when
Mhm.
someone really truly has it. There are other symptoms besides rage. There's other symptoms besides intense relationship dynamics and conflicts. There's a sense of emptiness, right?
Right.
And a lot of times there's comorbid or co-occurring histories of trauma and families that were very invalidating. So people who have borderline personality disorder really suffer. And this, there are no FDA approved medications for it, right?
Right.
So it's something that people really struggle with. And we know that dialectical behavioral therapy works, DBT, and a huge component of DBT is validation. So when you're with someone who has borderline personality disorder, you gotta, really do your best to validate what they're going through because that goes a long way. And really try not to throw that in their face because it's something that, in medical professionals and in hospitals, when someone sees that diagnosis on a paper, they're like, oh boy, and that's not
Yeah.
fair. Stigma exists within the hospital, the medical community too.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. And also in movies, like when you look in movies, normally if I think of a movie where somebody has borderline personality disorder, it's normally a lady who's hypersexual, and they make it appear as if she's using sex to get what she wants. Like that's kind of what you see, or what I've seen. So it's frustrating. And you mentioned the Hannah Ross and Cradle. Was that a portrayal of borderline personality disorder? Because I saw that movie a couple months ago.
I think so. I mean, I did a research study on BPD last year, and like I said, all those symptoms, right? Like there definitely were some of those I think they were trying to portray. But did you know that
Oh.
BPD exists in male populations too? So you
Yeah.
see a lot of people who are being misdiagnosed with sociopathy, with bipolar disorder, and they actually have all the symptoms of BPD, but there's inherent bias in medicine and women get slapped with the diagnosis more than men, but it happens in men too.
Right. And I'm happy that you mentioned the movie fact is interesting because that was an interesting movie, but also that men can have it. And I know Brandon Marshall, former NFL receiver for the Broncos, the Dolphins, and the Bears. he maybe at least 10 years ago, 10 years plus, he came out and said he was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He became an advocate for it. I've seen him post on Instagram. I've even connected with him. So to have males speak up about it is powerful, because outside of him speaking publicly about it, I have not, I can't remember any public male figure. I don't know
Pete
if you can.
Davidson. Pete
Oh,
Davidson said he suffered from it.
Pete Davidson. Oh, okay, actually, yeah. You know, I knew that, but I mean, you're in New York. He's from Staten Island, I think. How did I forget that? Pete Davidson, yes.
I used to see him around my neighborhood a lot because his dad worked at the firehouse. His dad was a 9/11 firefighter. So
Right. Oh, okay. Has that passed away in 9/11 or?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. I keep up with him a little bit. Okay, yeah. Wow, I should not have forgotten Pete Davidson. Oh boy, but anyway, back to the conversation. So now shifting gears, like as a guy, what advice would you have for men when it comes to talking about their mental health when it comes to dating? Because a lot of times I think that men don't know what's going on, because maybe they're afraid to go seek help, or maybe they just don't know what's going on. So how do you approach that with your partner, however you identify? Because the phrase is that men can't open up, because if they open up to their ladies or their partners and they're not accepted, right, they'll shut down. And I mean, I used to do that all the time, and like I think guys will, you're not going to go somewhere where you're not celebrated. So how would you tell a guy to approach this?
So I'm located on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, so I see a lot of type A, like men, like corporate guys, right? And
Okay.
so like I think that a lot of the men in particular that I deal with, they're very like goal oriented. And so when I bring things up, and I think this is how we learn things in therapy, like what are the treatment goals, right? And when you have people who are very goal oriented, they want to see the numbers, right? So you work with your patients, your clients in the first session to make that list of short goals and a plan, right? An action plan, a strategy to get to those goals. And then every couple of weeks, you set up an appointment to say, okay, where are we in this, on this plan? Where are we on this trajectory? Are we meeting the goals? Are we coming short of it? So I think that for some males or people who identify as males that I treat, having that very numerical, goal-oriented plan is helpful. It's like a game plan, especially you probably work with athletes and you see that. And also, a lot of the men that I work with eventually over time will start to, talk about things that we see in the psychodynamic psychotherapy world, right? Like the transference, transfers with the
Right.
woman. And so a lot of what gets played out in therapy with my male patients ends up being what's happening in their lives with their partners or with females in their family, like their mothers, their sisters, their aunts. And so that's why having that connection with a therapist and seeing that therapist over time really is important, because I hear people seeing a therapist for 1 month, 2 months, but when you really work with someone over time, they really get to know you. A lot of themes that play out in their lives actually gets played out in the therapy. And then you can give that feedback it's like gold, right? And this is the only person who knows all this stuff. So it becomes really like a treasure, and it makes you a better person in just about every area of your life.
Yeah, I like that. I hope the guys who are watching the stream pay attention to that. Because sometimes, well, at least on my end, I have to be stubborn. Sometimes we can be stubborn, and that leads me to my next question. Somebody asked this question um, last week. If for the lady who is dating a guy, and you think he would benefit from some type of therapy, how do you approach that? You can't drag him, into your office in Manhattan, So how do you approach that?
You can't, right? You can't force people to do anything. You can only focus on yourself. And I think that, people have to be able to feel like there's nothing wrong with them, that they don't have a problem. So I think a lot of the times in healthy relationships, you don't have to force someone to do anything. You kind
True.
of like, based on the dynamic, there's trust. And it's like, if I want to be a better person, then I'm going to do this for myself. And because I value your opinion and you've supported me, you've helped me, there's empathy, right? So I feel like in relationships like that, there's less push. And so that leads me to think about what is the quality of the relationship to begin with. And sometimes I tell you, sometimes people will be very open to letting the partner come in a session with me if they sign a HIPAA release and all that stuff, right? Other times they'll be like, absolutely not. And then I start to think, well, what's going on there, right? What is there to
Right.
hide? And so like it's it's complicated, but I think that overall when the relationship is healthy, you listen to each other, right? You may
Right.
not agree, you listen.
I like that because I don't think you'll ever agree on certain things, but just allow the other person to talk, without like over talking or like shutting them down. You give them a safe space to at least express their feelings. And now I want to shift gears a little bit to mental health, like red flags. So for people who are like, you're single, you're just meeting people, and like that you have your mental health issues and your struggles, and sometimes I feel like that makes you more vulnerable to being, attaching yourself to like a narcissist or somebody who is going to play you. But then you don't want to be overly paranoid. But what are some mental health red flags that we should be looking out for?
Well, when someone is invalidating and when someone tries to kind of pull you away from your friends, your family, I call that divide and conquer. It is a red flag, and I see it so many times. And when someone is, very self-centered on themselves, like they talk about themselves all the time, they don't let you get a word in, or they're starting to put you down. And also the opposite, right? Love bombing. Someone is hot
Mhm.
and heavy. They want all of you. Oh, your friends are jealous. They just want what we have. It's like,
Uh-huh.
should you really be like head over heels? We just went on 2 dates, right?
Right.
That is a red flag. And I think because of rom-coms and like instant love, like this whole like idea of like, being in love instantly, we just go with it, right? And it's not
Right.
necessarily healthy love, because in a way it is a projection of narcissism. It's like, well, why wouldn't you want to spend every day with me? I'm great.
Right.
Like it's hidden in this box of like, you're great, I just want to be with you, I want all your time. So you got to look for these subtle, symptoms, right? And also look at your own family. It's so important to look at your family dynamic. How are your parents with each other, right? A lot of times we look at chemistry, and chemistry is not necessarily a good thing, right? You're like, oh, it just felt so good. Well, maybe it's good because it's comfortable and familiar. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
comfortable and familiar is actually not healthy. And so you got to really reflect and think about,
Yeah,
patterns.
I
You'll
gotta
love
give you a love of the show. I give the claps. I always love the show because people don't know that. But I want to. I interrupted you. You were making some good
it.
points.
Okay. That's all right.
Oh man, like you really hit the nail on the head, and like with the love bombing, and I don't know. I feel like we're in an interesting time with dating in today's world because there's so many different thought leaders, right? And people who are like, "This is how you do it. This is how you do it." And I saw a TikTok video. I didn't get a chance to respond to it because I was busy today. But someone sent me a video of a girl saying, "Real men love something something," and she said something like, "Real men have stopped taking women on dates. Now they go for walks or they go to the coffee shop." And I didn't. I thought going to get coffee was a date. I don't know. So like, there's so many different like expectations here, and I don't know. Like, I'm not a teenage girl, right? But like, I don't know like the information that's online on social media, like. But I mean, she could be right. Maybe a real man has to take you to some kind of place. But I think that like coffee should be sufficient. Because you get to talk to the person. It's better than the movie, right? But when it comes to people, and I'm not saying she's right or wrong. This is my opinion. When it comes to people online who are putting out these, advices, like there's always somebody who's like a thought leader. What would you
Yeah.
say to somebody? Is social media helpful for our mental health? We're being exposed to so much stimuli as it relates to dating and mental health. Is social media like healthy? Because I mean, I love it, but I'm not sure it's all the way healthy, honestly.
Just like with too much exercise, too much food, too much, alcohol, too much marijuana, too much of anything is not good, right? And so like you want to have your social media diet. And we think about it as it's
I like
harmless, we're bored, we're like, quarantine or whatever it is, we're isolated. no, you got to have a diet for that too. You have to limit your time because it is all consuming. And there's two parts, many parts of the brain, but just two for now that we're going to think of, the
Right.
conscious and the unconscious, right? So we're like, even if we're scrolling and we're just passively watching it, our brains are absorbing that. And on an unconscious level, it's harming us. And so we really want to limit it and be careful about, what we expose our most precious organ to, because our brain cells are not replaceable yet. So we don't want to, harm it. We want to really protect it and nourish it. And so I would say like limit it, like you can't get rid of it. It's impossible. You got to stay connected, but you got to limit it and use that social media diet.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And somebody asks, how do you start dating again after a traumatic and abusive relationship? And somebody also asked how to get back into the dating field. So when, like, how would you, or actually, what's maybe a question that can provide better value? At what point do you feel like you're ready to kind of get back into, this amazing game of dating?
Like the abusive relationship thing, I think that relates to trauma. And when your body goes through trauma, you go through fight or flight. And, someone mentioned earlier, like I've just avoided telling my partner that I was, assaulted or whatever for a year. Avoidance is actually one of the symptoms of PTSD. So it's not just you. And so you really got to think about this as a medical condition. And that I think is validating. There's nothing wrong with you. You aren't broken. Your body is in constant fight or flight. And so I think that when you are physiologically in a safe place, I think that's a good time to start, testing and exposing yourself to these new ideas, because the idea of exposure therapy is actually one of the treatments for PTSD, right? And so you can work with your therapist to make up a fair hierarchy, and you slowly address the bottom fares and work your way up to the top fares while you're regulating your bodily, physiology. Your therapist may start you on something to tone your heart down, to, really calm that fight or flight, to really block those nightmares. There are things that are, blood pressure medications that could help you with that physiological reaction. So I really think that it's a baby step thing, right? And people feel guilty. Guilt is also one of the symptoms of PTSD that a lot of people don't
Right.
realize, right? So there's really nothing wrong with you. This is what happens to the body when it's traumatized. So we have to take care of our bodies and then prepare our bodies to re-enter the world.
Right. And I like the fact that you touched on PTSD so much during this live, because a lot of times people are exposed to trauma, and I've been shocked to learn how many people think that it's normal. Like, oh, I thought everybody kind of goes through this, or they think that that's how you're supposed to live life. But I do believe that there's a lot of people, especially in our community, with undiagnosed PTSD, and you're living with it,
Yeah.
and like nobody talks about it. So you're like, oh, this is just how things are done. We just kind of do it like that. And then you go on, and then you meet people, and then you date. The trauma is still there. You haven't addressed it. You have kids. You're raising kids, and
Yeah.
the trauma's not that it's still there. You haven't addressed it. So it's quite difficult. And like I always tell people that there's never a bad time to go see a therapist or a specialist. But I think that like post breakup, I think that's a good time to maybe check in with a therapist. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, like, especially when we think about our parents and what we've seen growing up, a lot of times we're just like, oh, everybody did that. Everyone fought, everyone
Right.
yelled. No, like that's actually not the case. And like, how did that affect you as a child? How did that affect your approach to relationships? Was there like a traumatic divorce where there's a lot of fighting? Really reflecting on the past helps you to prepare for the future. And it's also very validating, right? Because some people will say, I've been in a relationship this, that nothing's working out. I don't know why. Everything in my life is going well. I'm successful. I have friends. But then this one area, I just feel like I'm a failure. Well, let's look at the past. Let's see the brain trauma that you've gone through. And let's validate that pain. Let's validate it and work through it so that perhaps you can heal first. And then maybe you can start to think about being happy with someone else.
Yeah, I love that answer. And somebody asked a question about how to explain to the person you're dating, like, or like a brand new person, about take depression, or any mental health condition. Like, how would you like verbalize it? Like, would you say I have depression, OCD, PTSDG, or would you like spell it out for them and say, so I do this, I do that, and sometimes I have a hard time getting out of bed. Like, how descriptive do you want to get, or do you think it's helpful to spell something out to like your person?
Stigma does exist, and we've been saying this, throughout this talk, that like some partners are validating, some partners are empathic, some partners also have their own struggles, right? And so I think when it comes to the relationship, if you're feeling like you're in a safe place with your partner and you're sharing things, and these themes keep coming up, right? You're irritable, or you're worried that they're cheating, and you're constantly having these fears of abandonment, um, or you're just like guarded, right? You don't want to open up. So if these recurrent themes are happening and it's hurting your relationship with your partner, then that's an opportunity to maybe say something like, there are things in my life that, I've struggled with. And I may not tell you all the details, right? I may not tell you all the medications, the therapies, blah, blah. I'll get there with time, but there is a reason why, right? And there are baby steps you can take. And I've worked with my patients and their partners to help them understand things. And sometimes the partner's just like, oh my gosh, I had no idea, right? So that's why it's so important not to use like, just the internet. The internet has resources, but just like, things that are not related to you and personal to you. And it's important to really be with someone who knows you and who's a therapist who you trust when you're dealing with these complicated issues, because relationships and loneliness, that's a real problem. So we really want to be able to carefully get through that with someone who understands you and who can guide you through that process.
Right. And you touched a little bit about loneliness, and Valentine's Day is coming up. It's like 6 days away or so. Yeah, 6 days away. So, what are your thoughts on Valentine's Day in America? Do you like it? Or you don't like it as a holiday? What impact do you think it has on our society? Because I know where I stand on this. I just want to hear your thoughts.
I get like a rush of appointments the week before Valentine's Day, and then the week after, right?
Wow. Really?
I think
Wow.
I
Okay.
think
Wow.
that depending on who the diagnosis and the person and the individual and what they've gone through, it can be a stressful time, or it could be a time that's just like any other time, right? And so, like, if you're someone who struggles with abandonment and loneliness, then you got to come up with a plan. So sometimes I will literally be working with my clients and be like, okay, this is what we're gonna do, right? You're gonna make sure that you have a plan A. You're gonna, see a movie with someone, or you're gonna, make a dinner. You're gonna do something kind for someone, right? You're gonna use that day to volunteer. You're gonna plan a phone call, or, something, right? So that you're not feeling so empty, right? And at the end of the day, you're gonna do like a gratitude journal. You're gonna write the 3 things that you're grateful for, and you really want to think about those before you go to bed, so you're not feeling empty, right? Other patients, they're just like, I don't really care, like, I hate Valentine's Day. I don't believe in it. But it depends on the patient. Some people have a lot of anxiety around it and after it, and so you got to come up with a plan to prepare for that.
Yeah, and for me, I feel like it's become a holiday that's become so commercialized, and banks and companies and stores and restaurants will use that to capitalize off of people. People are spending money at like higher rates, just buying things almost as if the love is transactional to try and prove things. But I do think it's a good day to show love to your person. But maybe I'm telling myself about how unromantic I am. But like it's always been like a underwhelming holiday for me, even when I was in a relationship. Like I still never really did the most. I couldn't really understand it, and that's where I think social media sometimes is like harmful, because if you're already feeling lonely and you go online and you see all these extravagant displays of affection, that's not sustainable. So it's tough. I mean, when you know. So I think if you know that it's not stable, you could have the best Valentine's Day ever. But when people don't know and they think that, oh, this is how things are always supposed to be, I think I'm not sure where I stand on that. And you mentioned the loneliness and the isolation. I'm not surprised that you get. Well, actually, no, I am surprised that you get a lot of appointments the week before. That's why would you say that? That's the way it is.
When people struggle with abandonment, and I think you're right, social media and this pressure, especially in New York City, there's like all these prefix menus, like, and some restaurants you can't even make like a reservation on Valentine's Day unless you're doing the prefix, romantic. It's a lot of pressure. You see red everywhere, like, so I think it can be a daunting reminder that, for someone who's alone, that they are alone, right? And so, like, one thing that, my clients will do is that, that I suggest that they buy flowers for a friend, right? Surprise flower, surprise your
Mm.
friend with flowers. Do something kind for like a charity, treat yourself, take a bath, take a nice bath with candles, listen to music, like just love yourself, right? So like call your parents, do something nice for them. People underestimate the value of doing kind things for others. And also just like for those who've been hurt, validate your pain, right? Like, you may want to write in your journal, a narrative about your past love, and then put it away, and then think about three things that you're grateful for. So there are ways to cope with Valentine's Day, besides, just being like, I'm alone and no one loves me and I hate this day. But I think that you're right, that I think that social media can be painful because you see people having the best Valentine's Day ever. And you're just like, what about, what about me?
Right, and I'm looking through some of the comments. My guy Brett had left some good comments saying that as a man, you're not really trained to think that it's an important day. And yeah, I never really understood it. I just knew that this is the day that you have to buy your girlfriend something expensive. So like I would go along with it, and then after a while, I'm like, I don't really agree with this. But it's like you almost feel like you have to, or you do it to like avoid an argument. But I think you should be showing love to everybody in your circle, your friends, family, all your relationships on a consistent basis instead of making it all about one big day. Because I do feel like a good amount of the population is depressed around these first 2 weeks of February. And I doubt that it's Black History Month, so it's most likely it's most likely Valentine's Day. Just a wild guess. Just a wild guess. And I do have one more question because I know I've taken up almost hour of your time. I'm very thankful for that. Somebody asked a question, and I can tie this into a way to provide value for everybody. It said, "How do you tell someone who has done nothing wrong you need a break after almost 8 years?" So I guess my question to you is, how would you? We talked about relationships and how to start it up. How do you tell somebody you need a break? I'm not even sure about that question because a break, I don't know what that means. A break or like, is it a fake breakup or a real breakup or like, I'm not sure. But my question to you is when you feel like you've done all you can do and you really do want to move on, how would you approach that?
Well, my larger question is, if it's been 8 years, right? Shouldn't the person know? Right. So I feel like a lot of times in relationships, communication is just not effective, right? We can talk to our friends, we can talk to our family, and the one person that we're laying next to every night, we really cannot communicate with, right? And so
That's deep.
is it that that person doesn't know? Is there infidelity? And infidelity is not always a bad thing, right? Sometimes infidelity can actually help a relationship. Is there something about the individual asking the question? Are there intimacy issues? Is there a lack of commitment? I don't know. What I would say, it's the larger question is,
Mhm.
is there something broken in the communication? And so what is behind that? And, if are there communication issues just across the board? So I think that when you have open communication with the individual, it's not so hard, right? They know, they really know it's about to be over.
Right, right. I think people get a little bit more distant, or like you can kind of tell when it's over, but like you probably agree, it's best to communicate it. And I wouldn't recommend ghosting, especially not after that long, right? But it's best to communicate it and let that person know. But I don't think there's ever a right time, for a breakup, or a way to do it in the most mentally healthy way possible. But normally you kind of know, right? The writing's
Empathy
on
is
the wall.
important. Put yourself in their shoes, and like really, really try to put yourself in their shoes and figure out the best way that they can handle it.
Yeah, but I do think that the communication is better than just leaving them, to just figure out like what happened or like you just left. Is good communication solves a lot of things, but it's tough to have that conversation up front. But I definitely do agree with that. So I'm so thankful that you actually one last thing that somebody dropped in here, and I thought about this when you said it, but we had just spoken about this on this live show, either yesterday or last week, about infidelity. Can you elaborate about how it's not always a bad thing and how it can help a relationship?
So I'm not going out and recommending that people go out and cheat on their partners, but what I will
Right.
say is that sometimes in relationships, one person is feeling so unheard and so hurt and neglected that they may look outside the relationship for comfort. And that can really hurt the other person when they find out, right? And so a lot of times, it's either one, like you break up or you decide to like understand what the core issues are, right? Was it that after a while you stopped trying? Was it that, the person started to become abusive? Was it that there was mental health issues in one individual and they were neglecting the other, or vice versa? Like one person with the mental health issues, was being neglected by the person who didn't have it. So, you can really start to understand and repair a relationship depending on the perspective that you decide to take. And there are some relationships that actually become stronger after an incidence
I've
of
seen that.
infidelity. So it's not always all bad. It's not always about sex. Sometimes it's about other things, right? And so you really want to understand what happened, what caused the infidelity. And so a lot of times people will be like, oh, I'm not friends with her because she took her boyfriend back, or he's stupid
Right.
because his girl dogged him. No, like infidelity is not all bad, right? There's not all bad, there's not all good in anyone, right? You got to understand the nuances. And that's why you got to be careful about who you share your information with. I tell my patients, if you're going to share your relationship problem, share it with someone who you can help or who can help you. But don't go and tell everyone, because once it's out there, everyone has an opinion and you can't take it back and they're
Yeah.
going to hate your partner.
Yeah. No, no, I really like that. And sometimes people want to be heard, right? So if you're complaining about somebody, or I just broke up with somebody, or this and that happened, you're telling it because you need to feel validated. But I do strongly agree that you have to be mindful of who you talk to, because not everybody has your best intentions, in mind, and they can go put it on Facebook, or start a rumor and say, hey, I heard about so and so, and like I said on the live show the other day, as I've gotten older, I've learned that you can't judge people. Like if somebody stepped out, you can never look at somebody in the relationship and say, oh, that person should have left, or I don't respect that person, because you don't know what's going on. So like I think infidelity, like once you get past like the surface level, what it looks like at the top, there's a lot to uncover there. And I have seen relationships become stronger afterwards. Like I've actually seen that, with my own eyes multiple times. So it's
True.
definitely possible for people who, the trust has been broken on either side. Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to thank you so much for your time. Before I let you get out here, where can people find you online?
They can find me on Instagram, Dr. Judith Joseph, same as TikTok, and on Facebook, all the same. And then my website, Judith Joseph MD. So thank
Got
you
it.
for having
Awesome.
me.
No, thank you for coming on. And you're on Facebook as well. I didn't know you have
Mhm.
Facebook. You have Facebook profile.
Mhm.
Okay, then I'm going to edit the title because I put your name there. But I'm going to edit the title to make it click to your page, so
Oh, I
people can
see.
come over and check out your content as well.
Okay, awesome.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for the great questions, everyone. Bye.
All right. Take care, y'all. Y'all have a good night.
Bye.